Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the United States Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, where we're doing a series of interviews about challenges facing the Navy, the nation, as well as America's allies. And we're honored to talk to Dr. Lewis Duncan, who is the provost here, space physicist with a long career. You were at Los Alamos a long time ago, which is about as legendary as laboratory as you can get, especially for a physicist, and also was the Dean of Engineering at Dartmouth, which was the nation's oldest engineering program, even though you're a space physicist, and also a key role in the national lab that is for the U.S. National laboratory that manages the U.S. contribution to the International Space Station. And it's an honor to be here. And I want to start with space and some of the challenges the United States faces in space. Obviously, it's key to warfighting. Our adversaries and potential adversaries know that and have been trying to bolster their capabilities, but also deny us access to space, which is a key warfighting attribute of the United States. Talk to us a little bit about how the entire space game is changing and how a proliferation of lower cost technologies that allow more democratized access to space can actually both be a curse and a blessing.
That's a good question. And once again, welcome to the Naval War College. And I want to say these are my opinions and not that of the Naval War College or the Department of Defense.
Yes, and I fouled that up. I should have given you this disclaimer right up front.
But space has been a key part of the national security posture for more than 60 years now. We're very invested in space, both for communications and also for command and control, also for surveillance and reconnaissance, which is part of our national need to know, and also for treaty verification. So it serves many purposes, most of them for deterrence and peacekeeping, and some of them increasingly as we look at ballistic missile defense and other applications, some of it would be used in warfighting as well. It is an important part of what we do here at the Naval War College because technology writ large and space activities in particular is important for all of the services. And as every service uses space, it's grown in importance. Your point, which is very well taken, is that the commercialization of low Earth orbit in particular has made space very accessible to not only nations, developed nations, but nation states around the world and smaller groups, including a growing commercial sector in at least low Earth orbit. So it's become very busy, and the number of applications have proliferated. A good example is the military system GPS, where one could hardly look at a space system that's had more impact on how civilians, how we lead our normal lives than GPS, and it's changed fundamentally a lot of the way that we lead our lives and drive our cars and find our lost keys and so forth. So there's a lot of applications that have joint purposes, and here at the War College, we include space studies, emerging technologies writ large, but space studies included. Not so much that we're teaching the physics, but understanding the technology to the point that we can develop the policies and use the assets that they represent.
And what are some of the biggest challenges the United States faces at the hands of its potential adversaries that we, intellectually, doctrinally, but materially need to be prepared for, given it would be an opening salvo in any potential confrontation, right? If we go out from what was old Phase 2 and start to approach Phase 3, that would be a cue we would look for.
Well, first let me say I hope it is not the opening salvo, because all nations that have the capability of anti-satellite types of activity are deeply invested in the uses of space as well. And as the International Space Station demonstrates, we can share space. It's been viewed as not a national asset, but an international asset. But we do have potential adversaries with the anti-satellite capabilities. The Chinese in 2007 demonstrated their ability they attacked one of their own weather satellites at about 865 kilometers. And they demonstrated two things: that they do have intercept capability, and secondly, it's a very bad idea because that created more than 150,000 pieces of debris that has generated an almost a do-not-fly zone because of the potential of accidental destruction of anything that hits one of those debris pieces. So we live in a world in which if we get into a satellite war, a space war, you could imagine that the debris fields will be so intense that it would be denied access for everyone. But in that world, we do have tremendous military assets, national security assets, and in space, and command and control, which uses and communications, which uses space essentially. And as those assets could be threatened, it does place at risk our ability to achieve mission.
Let me ask you about the technology element of the curriculum here. Just about every single element, obviously you're doing a lot of like strategic work and theoretical work, and there are human dynamic and human factors on this. But technology is moving at a hyper-accelerated pace. One can argue it's always moved at a very rapid pace, but now it's almost like technology has hit the banana peel and sort of accelerated in many respects, in part because of the democratization of access to knowledge. I mean, we all have supercomputers in our pockets. And that technology is moving at quantum speed. But let's talk a little bit about quanta and quantum science and quantum computing, because some of these technologies, China now, who's an adversary, is a leader in some of these technologies. In fact, The Economist a couple of months ago now had an article about how the center of gravity may have moved from Silicon Valley to China, in fact, and that China's Silicon Valley may be actually more innovative than our Silicon Valley. Talk to us a little bit about the importance of studying technology and how you're making sure that the Naval War College stays on the cutting edge of the scientific intellectual thinking that in turn can help shape its strategic approaches, its teaching, its wargaming, all elements of your ecosystem here.
Well, space programs are a good example. In quantum science, we just held a workshop on the applications of quantum science to warfighting. It is a problematic area in that unlike other international programs, China has chosen to go its own way, and in quantum physics, it is ahead of us. Certainly in quantum applications, it's used satellites for quantum key distribution, encrypted communications across China, and even an encrypted video teleconference that was demonstrated between Beijing and Austria. So we do watch those technologies. We make our students aware of what's occurring in emerging technologies. We have one certificate program here that we launched just less than 3 years ago on the ethics of emerging technologies. So our students talk about the use and the possible uses and the policies that should be applied to those. We had a little over a year ago about the first meeting of international law scholars, legal scholars, convened by our Stockton Center for International Law, looking at the next generation of international policies for outer space. That the Outer Space Treaty really did not imagine the kinds of applications and the proliferation of capabilities that we've had. So we're always making sort of the cutting edge views of the policy and the applications, but at least here at the War College, we're not deeply involved in the bits and bytes of cyber or the satellite technologies for space. Most of that work is done at the Naval Postgraduate School.
You raised the space treaty, and so that reminded me of a question that I wanted to ask a moment ago, which is nobody may want war in space, but you also get a lot of things that you may not want. And so what's the right approach? Does it need to be sort of a mutual assured destruction model that compels all parties to act very rationally, that this is going to be very bad for me, it'll be very bad for him, this is a zero-sum game, let's go elsewhere in our competition? You know, what are the ways to ensure that doesn't happen? Because even though there are a lot of folks who are saying, well, you know, there should be treaties and there shouldn't be militarization of space, whether anybody likes it or not, space was born militarized. There was a military competition that was in space. Ultimately, you know, it wasn't for purely scientific purpose. So, talk to us a little bit about what the right approach is to avert war, at least from that theater.
Well, back in 1968, with the original Outer Space Treaty, it banned, and we're a signatory, it banned weapons of mass destruction in space. But the militarization of space, both for ABM, anti-ballistic missile purposes, for defensive purposes, we're beginning to look at assets that we know can be threatened and which we feel compelled to defend. Satellites, as I'm sure you're aware, are very fragile in a microgravity environment. They do not come heavily armored. And the velocities of projectiles are many times what we can get with the most efficient artillery systems here on the surface of the Earth. So they are easy to hold vulnerable, but so are the assets of any adversary. So that it is a situation, as you described, of mutually assured destruction or denial. And once you create those debris fields, once you intercept a missile and it scatters pieces and you have a proliferation of that, you could even begin to have something that was referred to as the Kessler syndrome. Don Kessler is a NASA scientist who in the early 60s pointed out that as we fill up at least low Earth orbit space with debris, you can reach a point where every collision creates so many additional debris pieces that they then seed additional collisions that you could have basically a runaway situation, of a cascade of failures, so that we would all be denied space. Now, that equation is very similar to other military systems like nuclear weapons, in which it's unlikely that we will have assets in space when our adversaries do not, and vice versa. So we need to decide whether space is that the mutual benefits are worth sharing, or mutual denial is preferable for our national security.
A parenthetic question. What's the best way to clean the debris from space? I mean, I know that there are a lot of folks who are banking that they can make a lot of money doing this in all sorts of ideas, from nets and all of that other stuff. But from your perspective, are there any plausible ideas that allow you to remediate that which has been polluted? Because effectively, what Kessler was talking about is effectively a chain reaction, right? Yes. One particle hits two particles, and they create, and it becomes an exponential problem.
Exactly. There are systems being tested even now on the International Space Station of nets to catch things. Of course, velocity is your big problem. Yes. And the typical orbital velocity in low Earth orbit is over 7 kilometers a second. At geosynchronous, it's over 3 kilometers a second. So impacts can be quite serious. And the smallest pieces of debris are very hard to track and get near to and collect. Right now, though, we don't even have salvage law for space. So when a satellite is defunct and it's in orbit, it still technically belongs to the country that put it there, and the liability that comes from whatever damage it might do. So there's a lot of commercial companies looking at ways that we might go and clean up a lot of the residual debris that's in our near Earth space. But those are not proven systems yet. And so right now we're in a situation where it literally is a place where it's getting a little crowded, and the International Space Station routinely has to move a little bit out of the way of a near pass, just like the Earth has to hopefully move out of the way or deflect a near pass of something much bigger.
We were in California, where we visited Virgin Galactic Virgin Orbit, excuse me, because they had their reorganization. Talked to Dan Hart, and one of the things that Branson has talked about is how to deorbit and maintain enough fuel to properly deorbit shrouds and a whole bunch of other things. And I think Elon Musk has agreed to do the same thing. So at least there are some folks who are focused on not actually contributing to the problem and helping resolve it in some manner. Let me bring this home to sort of your role as provost at the university and sort of the academic excellence. We talked to Admiral Harley, who's the president of the War College, and he repeatedly drove home the message that this is, a blue chip, first-rung academic institution, and you've worked at first-rung intellectual academic institutions. Talk to us about both the challenges and the opportunities of a war college that is trying to fire on that highest level of cylinder to be seen as equal to whether it's at a Kennedy School level or whether it's at a Stanford level, where it is recognized as a first-tier academic institution. What are the challenges of doing that and making sure that a military institution that has a far higher turnover in its student population and has a distributed learning curriculum for thousands of people outside the walls of this great institution. You know, what are the challenges of doing that when students may be going to Harvard and Stanford and staying there for a couple of years? Folks are cycling through here on 10-month rotations in order to be able to complete, you know, what is a full program, right? So they're doing in 10 months what somebody else is doing in 2 years, but it's still sort of 10 months, and it's still a fire hose.
That is, in fact, a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. I mean, we have certain advantages. I was a Carnegie Science Fellow at Stanford Center for International Security and Arms Control, and what we do is far less academic. And the Naval War College is the oldest and preeminent war college in the world. We get the very best students internationally to come here, the very finest rising officers in all of the services and some of the intelligence and State Department programs. What we do is not completely technical. What we do is talk about how the technologies, the warfighting missions, needs, are all part of a complex problem that includes politics and economics and culture and geography. We graduate students that understand the biggest pictures. As a physicist, I like to use the metaphor of Archimedes said, "Give me a place to stand and I can move the world." Well, as educators, this is a place where we can stand and we actually do move the world. It is a target-rich environment of students who are who have already proven themselves in their careers to get here, because this is a highly selective institution, but who are going to go on to do great things and fill great positions both in the military services and beyond. So we're highly motivated to provide the very best education. It is a 10-month intensive program. Our students do receive an accredited master's degree. They take a core curriculum which covers both joint military operations, and what we provide is the joint professional military education, not specifically a Navy education. But they also study theater decision-making, national security affairs, and strategy and policy. And they come out with a very broad view of the world, very well equipped to deal with the complexities of a world which is uncertain and volatile and complex and ambiguous in many ways. So we feel good about what we do, and we have the advantages over the Harvards and the Stanfords of the world, and that our students are not just learning things academically, they're actually applying those in the real world as they move on from here.
And what is your superpower?
Well, I view teaching as my superpower. It is an incredible privilege to be a professor here at the Naval War College because of the quality of the students that we get and the experiences they bring into the classroom. I learn far more from them than I think they ever get from me.
And I noticed a little plaque that you've got over there, which I think is really, really cool. And I have to say, tremendous library you have here. Dr. Lewis Duncan, thank you very much, Provost of the United States Naval War College. Sir, it was a privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for visiting us.